I just watched a Bob Dylan show. It was so good because he didn't want to conform. But like we're all about conforming, right? Because we want to be liked. We want to, he didn't want to be liked, actually. He wanted his records to sell, but he really didn't want to be in the public eye in that way, like ego, and he didn't want to think for other people, but he just knows that his songs reached people, right? They reached people that went through normal things like you and I, right? It was like the government, the things that were going on in the government. And that's like here today, right? There's so many things that people sing about, but back then they didn't really do that. So he started that to be able to share feelings and emotions in a song. Other people resonate with that. So it's just very interesting because I thought, I wrote a 55 video course, and I think, like, why did I do it? I did it to set people free. Like I know that I went through such emotional struggle. I literally felt like I'd be on a roller coaster ride all the time for many, many years. And I would say El Toro, was pretty much my ride because I just went super high up, super high down, super left, super right, like always extreme in emotions. It wasn't just any steady, stable emotions. It was always like, woo, 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 all over. And what I realized? That I had the power and ability all along to change that. I just didn't know that. I think the thing that leads to the thing, right? So I think because I got my salon and I failed forward miserably, I really didn't know what I was doing. It was just way more overwhelming than I could possibly imagine, because the hardest thing to do is to manage people. You think just being somebody's friend is going to make them smart or know what to do, or you think that other people will know what to do even if you don't know what to do. Because I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to manage people, and I didn't know how to guide, coach, or lead them until I got stronger, right? I had to get leaded, guided, and coached first. So I'm going to tell you that it was so awesome because I didn't realize when I learned to lead myself and learn how to really go within so I didn't go without. That's a Carl Jung quote, which I learned so much about Carl Jung because I needed to understand psychology. There's so much about psychology today that we don't really, exactly understand why we did the things we do, or, why our emotions had to run me for so many years, and how I kept old things in my paradigm. I didn't even know what a paradigm was. And that goes to say, do you? Do you know what a paradigm is? It's basically a mental program that runs you almost exclusively, like 98%. That's how much it's a paradigm is a pattern that runs you exclusively in autopilot. That means you're not even using your thinking mind. You're not even paying attention. It's just running you, or like a record that just keeps playing in the background all day long until you get into your thinking mind, which is your conscious mind. I always try to make them so you could see the right side, your conscious mind, the left side, your subconscious mind, because we have two parts of the brain. And there's a corpus callosum in the middle of that you have to develop in order to connect to the other side of the brain. Now, monks have the biggest corpus callosum in the world because they meditate all day long. So it gets built and gets stronger. They can connect their right brain to their autopilot brain all day long. So they're in their mind, it's very cohesive, because when you have a brain that's not cohesive and has a lot of trauma like I had, it's so disoriented. I remember seeing like this brain, and then it showed like compartments of different colors because there was so much chaos and confusion in my brain, because that's how I grew up, right? So that's the thing. We can take all the things that we grew up with and we could either live it out and follow the pattern, or we can change it. And that's what Bob Dylan did. He changed it. Like, he didn't want to keep going back to his past. Like, people would be like, the one girl that he met that he really liked, she's like, I don't even know who you are. I've been, I know you for a couple of years. I still don't even know you. Like, you don't talk about your past. You don't talk about anything. And, it's kind of like, listen, he was a very introverted person. When I do a disc behavioral assessment, which is DISC, which is dominant people, influencing people, steady, stable people, and analytical, cautious people, which, there's different traits to them. And we're a mixture of those 4 things. Every one of us has some kind of mixture of one of those 4 things. Sometimes I've never seen anybody with all 4, but I have one customer that told me she's kind of got almost all 4, but she's a very well-balanced person too. It's pretty amazing that when she told me, I was like, oh, you know what? That makes sense. She's so steady and stable, and yet she's fun. She's smart. Like, she coaches a lot of people for a big business, a big corporation. And it's just very interesting how it works. But Bob Dylan, he's really more reserved. So he automatically, and how do you learn who you are really quick? I'll just give you a quick little rundown. You either think, are you more outgoing or are you more reserved? Just think of those two. Over 51%. Like, if you were in a group of 100 people, would you instantly start talking to people, or would you kind of wait a minute and kind of just look around and kind of assess things? Because I'm a high I would just instantly go and talk to people. I'm outgoing right away. Like, you got to just know, if you have to think about if you're outgoing or not, you're probably reserved. Like, you understand? If you're like, well, I'm outgoing, but I'd really be a little more reserved first. Well, then you're in the S. You're the S or the C. But if you're outgoing right away, you're a D or an I. Like, that's how you can know right away to eliminate which one's your most dominant trait. Because we have a couple, you could have 3 of them very similar, all up to like 100 in that personality style. But it depends, because it changed. Like, me and my daughter both took it and we were a certain way. And then 2 years later, we changed. We grew. The more you become aware with who you are, the easier it is to grow, because you know what your strengths are, you know what your weaknesses are, and you can work on them. So now you want to ask, are you more task-oriented or are you more people-oriented? I'm more people-oriented. I'm a high I. My daughter's the S first, because she's people-oriented, but she's reserved. And there's, limitations and there's strengths in both of these things, right? Now, if you're task-oriented, where Steve Jobs, Einstein, and Bill Gates is all C's, they're reserved, but they're task-oriented. And then you got your D, dominant, determined, doers. They're like Lady Gaga, Michael Jordan, Donald Trump. They're just go-getters, right? So, but there's only 3% of them in the world. And the high I's, there's about 11%. In the S's, there's 69%. So this is your majority of who you're talking to in this world, the S's. Steady, stable, supportive, status quo, steady and stable. They don't really like to get out of their box. They don't like to get uncomfortable. They love to be comfortable. And they don't like change most of the time. And then you got your C, the analytical mind. And that is, I want to say 17%. But you could be 103 of them. It depends. It depends on what qualities and traits you had. It depends on what kind of childhood you had. And really, it's always going to go by, the influences that were around you under 8 years old and, people that influenced you. That's how you became who you are. But as an adult, you get to change who you are. And it all depends on what you want out of life. I was talking to somebody today and, he was saying, like, I failed he had to take this board. It was to be like not an x-ray technician. It was like something more major than that. But he failed the boards like 4 times because he's not good at taking tests, but he's an incredible worker and he did really good at all his practical. And that's the hard part, because if you're bad at test taking, but you know it all and you could do it all, but just your brain sit down and have to, say it all out and all these scenarios is not always easy. But he failed it, and now he missed it by 1 point, and you think that is so awful, and you're only allowed to take it 3 times. So he has to try to appeal it, and I said, like, we have to really realize, what do we really want? Like, it doesn't matter what you have to do it again, if that's what you really want. He's like, well, I'm going to have to take all the hours over again. I'm going to have to do the work all over again. You know what? But this is what I've learned. Repetition is the mother mastery of a pro. Do you understand? The more that you learn in something, the better you become at. And I love, even with Bob Dylan in his movie, he just stayed reserved into himself, even though he was in a public eye. But he wasn't very chatty. He didn't want to share all his emotions and all his feelings with you. Now, somebody like Katy Perry, forget it. She's wide-eyed, bushy-tailed. She's out there sharing all her emotions and all her feelings, and she's not afraid at all. Not that Bob Dylan was afraid. He just is a more reserved person. So it's funny when you see him in interviews, because I watched interviews after to see what he was like. And he was kind of like, listen, I don't want to think for you. And I just think simple. I'm not a complicated person, but people trying to figure me out, but you can't, because he doesn't have all this agenda that people are thinking he has, because he just was very simple. He didn't want to be in the limelight, as far as like, people, fans like going crazy over him and stuff like that, like to be a star. He's like, I didn't come to be a star. I wanted to sing music, right? So it's really interesting, like, of where you are in your life and where do you want to be. I have learned that to clean out your U-Haul truck is probably the best place to start. When we are born, we're attached to us is like a big U-Haul truck. It's like this big, well, there's a Pilgrim's Progress that's kind of referring to the same thing, but they say like we carry these bags around with us. But I like to say a U-Haul truck, because when you move, you just pack that sucker, and you always put the biggest things in first, right? Like the beds and the big dressers and the big hutches, kitchen hutches and things like that, right? Then the big couches, and you kind of put everything in the back first. And then you're going to put all the dishes, all the kitchen stuff, and then the living room stuff, and then your bathroom stuff, right? And then it's going to be all the last minute stuff at the very back of the very front of the U-Haul truck. So when you open up that U-Haul truck, all of a sudden, you got to get all the little stuff out first, right? But I want you to know, this is the best part. When you have somebody with you, guiding you through taking out that stuff out of the U-Haul truck, I want to say you're so free and you're so much lighter. There's something to say that we need to forgive. Forgiveness is the keys of great healing, and a lot of times it just doesn't seem that easy, but actually it is that easy. And I just want you to know that, I love Henry Ford. If you think you can, or you think you can't, you're right. Or the little engine that could, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, right? A lot of times when God says, I will give you abundantly above more than you ever ask, think, or imagine, we have to ask him, Lord, I can't, but I think you can help me. You can do it for me. And I used to say that to him when I was younger. I would be like, listen, God, there's no way I could forgive my uncle for abusing me sexually. Like, right? I was molested by my uncle, and I was like, there's no way. But I'm willing to allow you, God, to, forgive him for me in my heart. And it was very interesting, because my pastor at the time, it was Pastor Dave Durandi, he really encouraged me to write a letter of forgiveness to my uncle. Now, my first letter was like angry. I was rip-roaring mad. I was like, how dare you groom me? I was so young. I was only 5 years old. You were 25. You knew I didn't have my mother. You knew my dad was a drug addict, and blah, 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 blah. I just wrote all that I had to get out of there. There was so much stuff in there, but this is what I love. When you use your five senses to write that letter, you're using your five senses to write it. You're seeing, and then I was saying it out loud, and then I was hearing it. So it imprints more when you let it out more when you write it and you do it that way, because you're using your five senses. Listen, all that trauma and all that pain got in there by your five senses. The things that people said to you, the things that you've seen, the things that you heard, or even smells have a very distinct memory to them. So, I had to learn to let God in to help me forgive him, because I was angry and I felt like a victim, and I had every right to be a victim. I was so young, but I learned later that he also was abused by my grandfather, so it was interesting that when I found that out, I thought because my dad was abused, my uncle was abused, and then my aunt and my grandma was abused, all by the same person, right? So then, did they all abuse other people? No, but my uncle did with me and my brother. I don't really know exactly with my brother, because he never really went into that, but I remember distinct and vividly, and I went for counseling for like a whole year and did a whole, like in-depth whatever on my brain to really let those memories out. But I'll tell you, going over those memories and rehashing them only brought more distress to my brain and my body. When I learned how to forgive them and realize hurt people and damage people, and I didn't take it personal anymore, I literally emptied the U-Haul truck out of all the pain, all the victimhood that I carried for that issue that were in my tissues for a long time. And I'm going to tell you, freedom is so far greater than living in a self-imposed prison. It's like, by you not forgiving, you're living in the self-imposed prison. By me not forgiving my uncle for what he did to me, kept me in the self-imposed prison. It kept me in an emotional state of hurt and pain for so long. Listen, until I got my salon, did it change. My salon was the very thing that transformed me, because what happened was, I didn't know how to lead me all along. Even though I was a Christian since I was 21, gave my heart to God. Then I became Christianese, and I judged everybody else and didn't look at myself still. Just kept judging everybody. It was easier to tell everybody else what to do, but not for me to fix me. So that's the problem sometimes. When you're so damaged, you go to church, you just become churchese. You start looking at everybody else and being critical. And, meanwhile, take the plank out of your own eye before you take the speck out of your brother's eye. That's the hard part about church sometimes, because it becomes so churchese, and you're missing the really big picture of God. Loves us right where we're at, and we have to learn to walk with one another and stop judging people. And then I learned neuroscience, and even when I went back to church, because I learned a lot of neuroscience, how the brain works. But listen, the brain is science. It's not science. It's physical health and wellness to understand your brain. You know what I'm saying? To understand your body, your lungs, your tissues, your muscles, who cares? You know what I mean? If I want to learn neuroscience and not witchcraft or this weird thing, it's real. It's real. There's way more power in the unseen forces than the seen forces. What do I mean by that? Yeah, exactly. God is an unseen force, and so are his powers. Electricity, frequency, energy, gravity. Gravity is an unseen force, but it's so powerful. Oxygen, you don't see it, but we're breathing it every day, and you need it to live. So God's powers have so much more power in the unseen forces than the seen forces. And that's where we have 6 intellectual mental faculties. We have our reasoning mind, our imagination, and our memory. And then we have, so it's RIM, reasoning mind, imagination, memory, and then WIP, willpower, intuition, and perception. Those are free and they're inside. And that is what we need to really tap into, because that's where a lot of freedom comes in, because you use your inner strengths and qualities to fix the inside of you, because everything comes from within. So anyway, this is Coach Kimmy. If you need my help, you could always just book a call, or you can call me. Actually, I don't really like phone calls. I really like emails. Emails are my favorite way to contact me. success@coachkimmy.com. So it's SUCCESS at coach-kimmy.com. And I'd love to hear from you if you need to empty that U-Haul truck. God bless you. Have a great day.